to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. The best and brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes. We'll talk to them all, and we'll get the good, the bad, and the ugly on how they made it. Decoding the secrets of success. And now your host, Terry Barr.
Hi, this is Terry. For Grind to Growth to Greatness, we have a terrific guest today. I've run into this lady about a year and a half ago. I was very excited to read her story. I was working through my LinkedIn and all of my messages, and I ran across one of her posts, and I read the story, and I was like, goodness gracious, what an absolute amazing story. So a year and a half went by. I touched base with her a couple times, and we started our podcast, and finally she had a glimpse of time she could give to us. We're so excited to have her. Her name's Colonel Kim Casey Campbell. She is retired, but we'll call her Colonel. And she is a fighter pilot. She's a keynote speaker. She's a leader. She's held all kinds of positions in the Air Force, and we're just so excited to have her. And as you know, our podcast really delves into the story behind the success. And she has a tremendous story. She was a fighter pilot in combat over Baghdad. We're going to dive into that right out of the gate, but there's lots of things that got her to that point that we want to talk about, want to have her open up and really be an inspiration to those young people that maybe are running into the same kind of things she did back in the day. So welcome in Kim Campbell, Colonel Kim Casey Campbell. If you don't know what the KC stands for, we're gonna hit that, but we want to save that for a little bit later. But welcome into our show. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So Kim, you spent about 24 years in the Air Force as a pilot, as a leader. You've held some great positions in the Air Force, leader of men and women. At one point, you had over 1,000 people under your purview there. And so you've done a lot of great things. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to take our listeners back to the day, April 7th. I think it was 7-something in the morning, 2003. You were flying an A-10 Warthog, right? And you were doing close ground support for your friendly troops over there. I just want to kind of dive back into that story a little bit and talk about it, tell the listeners what happened. And then I have a few questions that I want to ask along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing, it was really a day like any other day on our deployment. We were supporting Operation Iraqi Freedom. And our role as A-10 pilots is to support the troops on the ground, which is exactly what we were doing. We would take off from Kuwait, fly all the way up to Baghdad, which is about an hour flight in an A-10. We'd air refuel, and then we would just wait. We would just wait in these stacks of airplanes for a tasking. And the big difference that day was the weather wasn't very good, which was abnormal for us. And there was cloud cover all over Baghdad. So we couldn't really see the ground below, and a little uncertain if we were going to be able to do anything to support our ground troops because we had to be able to see them. Then we got a call. We got a call over the radio. Our ground troops were taking fire. They needed immediate assistance. And it was like, it's go time. You know, it's everything that you train for and plan for. But when you hear that over the radio, when you hear troops in contact and we're taking fire, we need immediate assistance. It's like, okay, hair in the back of your neck stands up. The adrenaline starts pumping because you know that lives are on the line.
Yeah.
So we listened to the ground controller describe everything that was happening. And while we were proceeding to the target area, and we came up with a plan that we would find a hole in the clouds, and then we would just dive below the clouds to get below the weather and then take out our target area.
Now that day, how high, that's one of the questions. I read your book. I read it actually twice, but how high were you? I'm assuming there was 2 of you at that point and two Warthogs. Okay. And how high were you above the clouds before you dove in through the gap?
We were about 20,000 feet, and the clouds, could come up to about 20,000. We were kind of skimming the clouds in places, and the clouds would go lower. It was just, it wasn't like one fine layer of clouds. It was just kind of clouds all over the place and us trying to find our way through.
Just to be clear, I don't fly planes. I don't like planes. And so I don't know anything about your job, or so if I get out of line, just put me back in line. But that was my big question. I wonder how high they were before they dove into the clouds. So
we're about 20,000 feet. I mean, I think airliners fly much higher. But it's still, you're above the weather. It's almost, eerily calm and peaceful when you know there is this like incredible battle raging below the weather that you can't see.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so we finally found that hole in the clouds, and I remember just looking over, watching my flight lead. He just very confidently, just rolled inverted and drove down below the weather. And then I heard him say, "All right, Casey, it's your turn." And looked down, kind of found that hole in the clouds, and was like, "Well, here it goes. Here's what we train for. Here's what we do," and dove down below the weather. As soon as I got down below the weather, that's when I could kind of see, like instantly see this firefight. There were bright flashes and smoke and tracers kind of going back and forth across the river. And, it's that moment of, this is a little bit surreal. I mean, we train for this, we talk about it, but to see it and to be as low as we were to see it was eye-opening. But that's like a half-second pause, right? And then it's games on.
Was this your first battle? Then I call it a battle. Was this your first entry into a battle, or have you dropped ordinances on other situations?
I had been in other situations before, but nothing quite like this. I think the threat was higher, the risk was higher, the threat to our ground troops was higher. It was definitely more pronounced than anything I've ever done.
I can't imagine that. So you dove down into the clouds, and you immediately have to assess the situation, right? And you have to figure out, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's just because all of a sudden you're seeing tracers and smoke, and it's very surreal, while at the same time you're trying to, at that point I'm diving below the weather. I'm looking for my flight lead, looking at the target area, make sure I know where the target is, where the friendlies are. I'm trying to build my situational awareness after being above the clouds and only having this idea of what's happening. Very quickly, my flight lead rolled in to attack our target area. We had decided we were only going to do a couple passes because it was so high threat, high risk. And we did a couple passes. Coming in for my last pass, rocket pass, make sure everything goes correctly. And then as I'm pulling off target, which is what I normally do, pull off target, just trying to get my energy back, climb away from the threat, away from the ground. It's just when I feel and hear this loud explosion at the back of the airplane. And I knew immediately I was hit. There was no doubt in my mind.
Now, originally, according, again, this is all based upon your book, but originally you went in at one angle and quickly figured out that you were supposed to be coming in. Well, I guess your flight lead told you, or somebody on the ground told you, we need to come in from the other way because we're not getting to under the bridge or something like that.
Yeah, we tried to come in from the north. It made sense for kind of how things were set up and the quickest way to get in. And we were told by the ground troops that direction was not effective. Yeah. So I came off target without shooting because it was not effective, and we set up again. So you adjust real time. Things don't always, you come up with a plan and sometimes it doesn't work, and you come up with a new plan. Yeah.
So you dove in and you dumped your ordinances, and then you were climbing back out of that situation, and then you got hit. And what was that moment that you realize, what, I just got hit? Do you remember what that was in that second?
No, I mean, I knew immediately because there's this like bright flash that's kind of surrounded the airplane, and immediately I try to equate it like if you got rear-ended in a car at high speed. I just dumped the airplane over, nose low. I could see Baghdad getting closer, and I just instinctively pulled back on the control stick because, this was kind of a shocking moment. And when I pulled back and the jet did nothing, that was kind of the
oh my moment.
This is not the moment.
So,
this is not going to plan now.
Yeah. One of the other questions I had in that moment that when I read it, again, I don't know anything about airplanes, but you said you pulled back on the stick and nothing happened. You lost all your hydraulics and everything was right before you went into what you folks call manual reversion. Were the jets or the motors, the jets still running at that point, or?
Oh yeah, the engines never stopped.
Okay, running. All right. I wondered about that because then when you talked about hitting the manual reversion, I thought, well, does that start everything back up, or how does that work? But that's
no, thank goodness. So the engines worked exactly as they were supposed to. They kept running despite sustaining some shrapnel damage. The engines kept running. Which, if I had lost engines over Baghdad, if I had. I would not have gone well. I likely would have been in a parachute down over Baghdad. But thankfully, the engines kept running. It's just hydraulics are what allow us to fly the airplane, to have control over our flight control surfaces. Right. And when you lose hydraulics, and in my case, they were dumped out instantly based on the missile impact, I lost control of the airplane. Thankfully, the A-10 was built to take hits, and so it's got an emergency backup system so that if you lose hydraulics, you essentially are able to fly the airplane with cranks and cables by just flip the switch, and it puts it in this backup emergency mode that allows you to fly it really mechanical, manually. I think of it like old school flying. It's the jet is heavier. It's very difficult to fly, but it flies. And that's all I cared about at that moment.
Of course.
Pull the nose up and get away from Baghdad.
Yeah, of course. I'm reading the book. Of course, now I'm not a fast reader. I read a lot and I listen to a lot of books, but I read the book. It's 2 or 3 pages long. And I'm thinking, how long did it take her to make the decision? I know it was instant almost, but how long did it take you to make the decision? Okay, I have no hydraulics. I've got to go to plan B. And according to what you said in the book, that's not something you train for a lot, but you do train for it, right? So how long did it take for you to go, okay, I've got plan B, I need to execute that?
So I don't really have a good estimate of time because all I have is when I say that I'm hit to when I tell my flight lead that I'm in manual reversion. And that's roughly 20 seconds. But I feel like in that time, I probably, I'm trying to analyze everything, figure out what's going on. But I think I probably moved that switch very quickly. Yeah. Now, we do train for getting hit. Yeah. We practice getting hit, sustaining battle damage and what we would do. Okay. So that was pretty natural. We just don't fly in manual reversion very often. Yeah. So flying back to base in that emergency backup system, like I had only spent maybe 30 seconds in manual reversion previously.
So that must have been that must have been physically and mentally taxing. That's like driving a car without, steering honestly. So
yeah, it's like driving a dump truck without power steering. Yeah. It was just heavy. I would say it was physically and mentally exhausting to fly that airplane an hour home in that backup emergency mode.
So you made some decisions immediately. You made the correct decisions immediately. Your mindset, all your training and your everything kicked in and it worked and like clockwork. And then you get into manual reversion. I love, and I'm going to implement this in my life. I love aviate, navigate, communicate. First you had to aviate, which fly the plane, figure out what's going on with the plane. Then you got to navigate. How do I get home? And then communicate with your second or your first at that point. But when it came to making the decision at the end of your flight home, that was a pretty major decision, whether or not to eject or to land the plane. I'm interested in knowing how you made that decision, because that, according to what I read, that's not a real likelihood of landing a plane that's all shot up that way.
Yeah, I would say probably one of the harder decisions I've made in my life. It's the idea that we don't train to land in manual reversion at all. We didn't. We still don't in real life. We do it in the simulator now, but at the time we didn't train for it all. And I felt like the decision that I made could be the difference between life and death, right? Like ejecting felt okay in some ways and landing felt okay. And they both felt not okay. I mean, it was just like a no-win situation. I feel like I had an hour. I took the time to really think through how the airplane was flying, how it was feeling. Yeah. I made the best decision I could with the information that I had, knowing that I could still potentially eject at the last second based on the way that our seat is designed. Yeah. So I knew that I could give it a shot and give it a try. But after flying the airplane for an hour, I actually felt very comfortable with the way the airplane was flying. I just felt
interesting,
very good with it. And it just felt like the right decision.
Huh. You've got to be the only pilot in history that's flown that way for over an hour, I have to think. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it sounds like that would be the case. But I noticed something else that kind of hit me. Was it number one pilot? You were number two?
Yeah. So he was my flight lead on the mission, the more experienced pilot. Once I got hit, he eventually kind of tucked in beside me and I was out front. And I mean, he was my wingman on the way home, providing that mutual support. for.
I loved what you said in the book about him, and that was, he said, this is your decision and your decision only. And
Yeah.
I thought that was a good leadership, a trust in your colleague, if you will, call it a colleague, to do the thing that was most important. And so that hit me, and I understand that he recently passed away. Is that right?
We did.
Yeah. And I wanted to extend my deepest sympathy there. I know that must have been a difficult thing for you.
Yeah. It's, it's the reality of life, but it doesn't make it any easier. And I think, when I look back on these moments, I realized what a critical mentor he was for me, what a critical example he set very early in my career in terms of leadership and believing in your people and trusting your people to make decisions, empowering them to make decisions. But also he had my back. I mean, the other part of that is he was like, hey, this is your decision and I have your back no matter what. Like, you make this a decision, you make the call, you're flying a single seat airplane, but I've got your back. And I think that just stayed with me throughout my career in terms of leading teams, because I saw what it looked like to do it right, to really empower people and believe in people. Prior to this, he also made sure we had the training and the resources. Like, it wasn't in the middle of nothing. That to be able to do that, he really, really set a solid example for me as a pilot, as a leader, as a human being, very early in my career. So I feel very lucky and blessed to have that experience in many ways.
Well, I was sorry to hear about that. I just recently read that his name was Rick Turner, and we certainly give out our deepest sympathy to him, his family, and but thank you for sharing that. It seems like that incident, we'll call it an incident, I don't know what you folks call it in the military, but that incident over Baghdad, everything that could happen happened, and everything as a result, the reaction to it, the response to it happened very well. It seems like everything happened correctly, and you got back on the ground, and the rest is history, as they say. I just think it was an amazing story. But what I think is even more amazing, and I want to transition a little bit and kind of go back in time, back to 1986. You were a 10-year-old girl, and you watched the shuttle go up. Kristen McAuliffe and the other lady were going up. They were going up in the space shuttle. And that, as we all know, was a catastrophic trip that no one survived that. And yet, when I read your words in your book, it was kind of amazing. It seemed like that was a huge catalyst in your mind, in your young mind at 10-year-old. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think many of us remember where we were that day and watching it. And I remember as I watched it, obviously there was this really, the thrill and excitement of flight as we watched the shuttle launch, but then watching the tragedy unfold as we watched it play out. And there was just something in that moment. I was watching with my mom, and I just realized, even at 10, like, the astronauts died doing something they believed in, something that was big and important, something that was bigger than them. And I just thought, you know what? That's what I want to do. I want to commit my life to something like that, like where I feel something is big and important that I'm willing to risk my life for. And so I decided then that I was going to be an astronaut. And then I talked to my parents about it and told them that I was going to be an astronaut. And I think they were kind of like, that's a nice idea. Like, we'll see. Yeah. And I remember my dad had said, if you want to be an astronaut, many of the astronauts were pilots. Many of those pilots went to the Air Force Academy, something you might consider. And so I was like, all right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the Air Force Academy. I'm going to become a fighter pilot and hopefully someday go on to become an astronaut. Yeah. And I think my dad was like, okay, noted, I have kids that are that age now. And, they tell me a lot of things they want to do. And I probably do the same thing. Like, okay, we'll see.
Yeah.
That was like you said, it was a switch. It totally flipped my view on homework, on extracurricular activities. I wanted to fly. I joined the Civil Air Patrol. Like, it was just a huge turning point.
Yeah, that was fascinating to me, reading that little section of the book. As a 10-year-old kid, now I'm about 20 years older than you are, but at a 10-year-old kid, when Vietnam was wrapping up, I was 10 and 74. And I can remember just being like scared out of my mind that I was going to be drafted and go to war and all of the things that kids worry about at that age. And it struck me as a 10-year-old young lady how something so dramatically catastrophic not only changed your destination, but it changed it for the positive. Because, in my case, gosh, I was like, I wanted to go hide under a rock. I can remember feeling that way, but it changed for the positive. And then your trajectory was only that. And that was exciting to me to read how you just flipped the switch in school and sport and dedication. Tell me about that journey from that day to your senior year in high school and how that all unraveled.
Yeah, at 10, I committed myself to this idea. And so everything that I did now focused on that. So, I played a lot of sports. I got myself involved with a lot of extracurricular activities. I joined the Civil Air Patrol, worked my way up in rank in Civil Air Patrol. I did all the things that I thought I needed to do to be accepted to go to the Air Force Academy. I struggled a little bit with the SAT.
Yeah.
It wasn't my strong point. Yeah. But I had so many other things going for me in terms of grades and all these things. So I thought that I would be competitive and really had my hopes set on going to the academy. I only applied to a few other schools because my parents made me, but it's not what I wanted to do. And then my senior year in high school, April timeframe, I go to the mailbox every day looking for that letter. And I saw the letter from the Air Force Academy. I knew the AF in the corner and I was super excited and ripped that thing open. And it turned out it said, sorry, but you've been rejected. Those weren't the exact words, but that's what in my mind, that's what I see. And it said, it's highly competitive process and thank you for applying, but maybe next year. So I was pretty crushed. Yeah. I'll be honest. It was definitely a low, when you work so hard for something and someone says, no, not good enough. Like, it hurt a lot.
Well, I felt that in the book. The writing was good. It made me feel that way, but it didn't feel like that was the end to me. You said how the disappointment was there and you're like, oh my goodness. And then your mentor was Colonel Arbaugh.
He was my lead officer.
And he just said, hey, maybe you don't give up, write a letter. And you took that and 10x that advice and wrote a letter every week for the next however many weeks. So tell us how, tell us.
I wrote that letter every week.
Yeah, that was amazing. But tell us how that unfolded. I mean, I read it and then I'm like, oh, she didn't make it in. And I have a good buddy, lives across the street from me that I went to high school with. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force for a long time. He knew of you, but he got out before you did. And he said, yeah, I didn't get in either. And I thought, okay. And he went back to college and got an aeronautical engineer and all this other stuff, and then went back and reapplied. But tell me about that and how you said, okay, this is another turning point. Age 10, you're saying, okay, I'm committed. You commit the next 7 years of your life. And they say, nope, sorry. And you're like, I'm not going to give up. Tell me about that mindset.
Yeah. I think part of it was I had people around me that really believed in me and supported me, so it wasn't like I did this on my own. I had parents who were supportive, teachers, friends, and then a liaison officer from the Air Force Academy who was like, Kim, you've got a great resume, keep trying, keep working hard. We eventually also found a way for me to take the ACT. I grew up in California. Yeah. It wasn't really a thing at the time. So I was able to take the ACT, which helped improve my scores pretty significantly. Right. But every week I would write the Air Force Academy a letter saying, hey, here's, I could do 10 more push-ups or 5 more pull-ups, or I got, this score on a test this week, or eventually my ACT scores. And eventually in June, about 2 weeks before basic training, I finally got that acceptance letter saying that I was going to be offered a late offer of acceptance. And would I take it? I was, of course, in my mind, even though I had plans, other plans, I was all set to go to UC San Diego on an ROTC scholarship. My heart was still with the academy. You
must have been elated at that point. I know you went and told all your friends, told your mom and dad, whatever. All of the.
It was pretty exciting. You feel like maybe it's not going to work out, right? You kind of like start having all that doubt, like maybe it's not going to happen. So ecstatic might be the right word.
That's a great word.
This episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness is brought to you by Terry Barr. Distinctive Real Estate. Advising families across Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia for over 15 years. Visit the website at terrybarrealestate.com.
So you prepare for the academy and you go off to the academy. I mean, there's a couple stories that you had a couple experiences as a young woman in between age 10 and 17. One, I want to kind of like go back because it's relative to the future, but you had your shop class experience with your shop teacher. And if it's okay, we'll talk about women versus men a little bit, because I have no doubt in my mind I could never do what you do and what you did. So, but I want to talk about this because I want this to be an inspiring thing for young women around the world, around our country and other places, that you can do what you put your mind to. You just have to continue to effort and to work hard and to kind of burn the boats behind you, if you will. So your shop class experience, simple experience, but it seemed like it had a profound effect on you. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So this was middle school time frame. And, I work with my dad in the garage all the time. We built stuff. I don't know. It was like, I enjoyed that kind of stuff. And so I took shop class. It was, wood shop class in middle school. I didn't really think anything of it just because that's what my dad and I did. And I was the only girl in the class, which, I don't know, maybe that was the thing of things to come, but it wasn't really a big deal to me. My teacher was a little bit older, an older gentleman, we'll call him. And I remember I had done all the work on this pencil box case. And, I'd done everything, getting ready to stain. And I think we had to like get approval before we could go to like the next step. So I brought it up and was like, all right, can I, what do you think? And he kind of gave me this little smile and he was like, oh, it's good enough for a girl. I was like, what? Like, I think my blood was boiling, but I also was like, what do you mean? What do you say? Yeah. And so I kind of stomped off back to my desk and I was not like really thrilled with that comment. Yeah. But I was also like, well, I'll show him, right? Yeah. Like, it was kind of like, I just was like, it made me mad. But at the same time, I was like, well, I don't ever want to be just good enough. Like that never, I don't care if just good enough at anything didn't appeal to me. So I don't know. I still, to this day, I have no idea if he was like trying to poke at me a little bit to like light a fire in me, or if he really meant it. I have no idea. But to this day, I remember that story. And it's just for me, good enough is never how I've lived my life. I've always strived to do better or work harder.
Another opportunity to shut it down. Or an opportunity to say, I'm going to use that as motivation. In our day and age, unfortunately, a lot of young people that maybe don't grow up in an environment that's, encouraging, they get knocked down and they shut it down. And yet both of those times at age 10 and at age, whatever age that was, 15, 16, you chose to push forward and not shut it down, but keep moving. And I thought that was it was paramount in your life enough that you put it in the book. And I thought that was interesting to me.
I think sometimes people see the resume, they see like, the different things that I've done throughout my career. Right. And what you're not seeing is all the stuff behind the scenes.
Of course.
When you see resumes, right? And there were hard things. There were really difficult things. And, I didn't always handle them well or right, but I learned from them and I tried to use them in a positive way. I wasn't going to let it get to me, as being the only woman in fighter squadrons throughout my career. There were a lot of things that maybe weren't the best situations, but I also just used it to my advantage in many ways of like, all right, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to push harder. I'm going to prepare. I'm going to make sure I'm going to ready. It's also a lot of pressure, but at the same time, like you can take it and turn it to your advantage.
Yeah. I mean, I felt that throughout the book, even as you arrived at the Air Force Academy. And, your mom and dad were integral and continued to encourage you to, continue on and be prepared. And, you told the story of your losing the shoe at a foot race. And your dad's comment was, well, I guess she is tough enough to be at the Air Force Academy. And he was a standout there as well in his own 25 years before you got there. So you had the opportunity for somebody to push you along that way. And I thought that was interesting. But you showed up at the Air Force Academy and you were standing on the Bring Me Men ramp. And I wanted to take a second, and I know this is kind of a little bit of a divergence from our conversation, but I wanted to read you this that was in your book, and it struck me, and I had questions about it, but it was the Bring Me men ramp. It was the bridge to our future life and all that it could be. This was a ramp that you stood on as you went into the grounds, correct, as new cadets?
Yeah.
And there was a poem there. It's a Bring Me Men poem. It says, bring me men to match their majesty, men to climb beyond their summits, searching for their destiny, these men to build a nation, join the mountains to the sky, men of faith and inspiration. Bring me men, bring me men, bring me men. And here you're standing on this ramp with this type of poem that it's obviously it's there were no women in the military back then, but was that inspiring to you, or was that another point where you said, we're going to bring you men, but we're also going to bring you a badass woman?
Yeah, I think, I knew it was a poem.
Of course.
The poem's up on the wall as well. And it'd been there since, I guess, the start of when the academy was built, when there were no women.
Sure.
But I think it was also like maybe a sense of like pride of like, all right, like you said, we're going to bring you men and we're going to bring you some badass women as well. I never really was offended by it. It was just a poem that was put up at an earlier time. Yeah. I mean, it's not there anymore. It is now the core values ramp.
Okay.
But I think at the time, to me, it was like, I think the other side of this is I remember 4 years later, marching down that ramp, leading 4,000 members of the cadet wing.
That's where I was going next. That's where I was going next.
Like for me, like it was like I walked up with uncertainty and doubt, and could I perform and could I do it? And then I walked down, approaching graduation, leading 4,000 members of the cadet wing, and it's kind of like, all right, we brought you men and we brought you some badass women too.
And I love that because it's not, hey, I'm in the group of men coming down here. I made it. I'm a woman. It was fall in behind. Like I'm the leader. And I guess your dad was that commander as well of cadet, and you're the only father and daughter to ever do that. To me, it was, I don't know, it was, when I read that part, it was chilling to me. It was just like amazing. So that's an interesting part of your experience at the academy. And I just thought that was very, very interesting and very entertaining part of that. Tell me about your mom and dad just a little bit while we're talking about them. Because I'm a big family guy. I know you've got 2 boys and your husband is a retired colonel. And that's a fun story. You have to buy her book, Flying in the Face of Fear, to learn about, the end of her career in the military was fun with her husband as well. So, but tell me a little bit about mom and dad. I know mom was an oncology nurse, dad was an attorney, right? Tell me what kind of effect they had in your life overall. I know this is your story, but they're intertwined through this whole story.
Oh, yeah, of course they are. I mean, my parents have been incredibly supportive. I mean, I've been very lucky to have just incredible parents who have been, my mentors, my role models. They still give me advice to this day. And I think, just they were really a critical role in my life. And just from a support standpoint of being there for me when times did not go as planned, when things were a little rough. I mean, they still are. They've just been such a critical role, played such a role in my life, and grateful for the example that they set, to be there for me when times were good and where times were not so good.
Yeah. So I felt like your dad it was interesting because one part, when you were considering going to the academy, there were no women pilots at that point. And mom and dad said, yeah, chase your dream. No women pilots, it's the law, but they didn't tell you. And I thought that was,
because
cool.
that was 1986. Yeah. So women were not allowed to be combat pilots at the time. Yeah. And they never said that. They never were like, that's actually not allowed. They never really told me that. They just said, all right, go after what you want. And, that changed that changed in 1993 when I was graduating from high school. So by the time I got to the academy, it wasn't an issue, but, my parents never put limits on me, never put boundaries like in that way. They clearly had rules and things at home, but, no, they just, they wanted me to work hard. They wanted me to put in the effort. That was really what was most important.
Well, it sounds like you put in the effort. I have 2 sons, both adults. One was a football player and college football player. And I watched him sacrifice a lot of his young life for his dreams. And one of the questions, though, I have a couple questions left, but a lot of people say, what'd you do to get there? How did you get there? That's kind of the story. Everybody wants to know, how'd you get there? But I'd like to know what you felt like you sacrificed for your dream or for your goal. Like, what do you feel like you sacrificed?
I don't know. I don't know that I feel like I sacrificed I mean, like that, my life was my dream, like I was kind
Right.
of working towards it all along.
Right.
I mean, there were things that I did differently. I don't know that I look at them as sacrifices.
Yeah.
I mean, my husband and I had kids much later in life.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a sacrifice. It was just what we chose. We chose that because 9/11 happened and we were in combat and deployed for 10 years, pretty much nonstop.
Right.
It wasn't really a sacrifice. It was just different.
Yeah.
It was just the way we chose to set our priorities, and we focused on what was important for us, and we made the best decisions we could in the time that we had. But
Right.
I don't know. I don't know that I look at any of it as sacrifice. It's just what we did.
I like that. No, I like that. That's good. I get different answers to that question, and I appreciate the approach to that, I chose my life, I chose my goals, and it's fortunate, and it's nice that you ran into your husband and you both had the same goals in mind and the same trajectory at pretty much the same trajectory, and then made those decisions together to retire. I thought that was neat to see in the book. And then your kids had some sort of an effect on you folks too, as you got closer to the end of your career. But tell me about your boys and how they responded to your husband and yours career as young men.
Yeah, I think in the early days, obviously, they just grew up around airplanes and they really actually didn't appreciate them at all. They liked fire trucks better. We'd take them to air shows. They'd play on the fire trucks
Sure.
while the Thunderbirds were flying over.
Right.
So just part of life. But I think as they got older, as we got more responsibility, it definitely took a toll on our family for sure, in terms of like us being together.
Right.
And I think that really became the hard thing. I mean, if you want to talk sacrifice, it's probably more, I look at the sacrifices that our kids made in terms of moving multiple times. And we kind of got to the point in our career where we were both very busy. I was a group commander responsible for 1,000 people throughout South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. So a lot of travel.
Right.
My husband at the time was responsible for more than 10,000 people at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. He was the wing commander.
Amazing.
We had a lot on our plate, and we had 2 young kids, and it just became very obvious that something was going to have to go. Like, it just wasn't doable in the way that we wanted to raise a family and be commanders. It wasn't all working. The kids let us know that, as kids do.
Sure.
Kids aren't afraid to say things. So they certainly did. They let us know.
Yeah.
But that was our turning point of like, maybe we don't need to keep going and keep that progression and promotion. Maybe it's time to step off that train, if you will. And it felt right. It felt like the right decision to move on at that point and not kind of take the traditional promotion track.
Yeah.
And to take a step back and focus on our family.
Yeah. It made me laugh a little bit. Again, everything's related to the book for me, but it made me laugh when you got a call from, I don't remember the name at this point. I didn't write it down, but from the Air Force Academy. Hey, would you consider staying on for a year? And your husband's in the background saying, all right, what now? And I thought that was an interesting, but it was would you say that position at the Air Force Academy, that last as director of their character division, I didn't get that right, but was that a pretty fulfilling thing for you? Because you mentioned how important that was to you.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think multiple times, you kind of get the call. You think you're retiring, you think things are winding down, and then we get a call. Hey, would you mind doing this? Would you mind? What do you think? One was coming back to the Air Force Academy, which for us, we were planning to come back to Colorado anyway.
Gotcha.
It was an opportunity where we could continue to serve, really inspire this next generation, but also spend a lot more time with our family. And so that got us to the Air Force Academy. Again, we thought we'd call it and retire. And that call that you mentioned came from the dean at the time at the Air Force Academy. And she said, hey, the superintendent would like you to stay on for another year. What do you think? And I kind of thought she was crazy at the moment, but you're right. I mean, that job was the director of the Center for Character and Leadership Development. And, for me, it was like the one job in the Air Force that I couldn't turn down. It was like this opportunity to come full circle, right? To back to where I started, to help inspire this next generation of aviators and leaders. And, what an incredible opportunity to serve, to give back. And I also learned about myself along the way. I mean, here I am surrounded with 40 of these amazing people who their primary purpose and focus in education and training is leadership development. And I just feel like I developed, which, sometimes you think at this high point of your career, you're like, no, I'm pretty good. I've learned a lot of things. There's always more room to grow and to learn from others. So really tremendous opportunity in many ways. But I love being back at the academy and giving back and being back to where it all started for me.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's an incredible story. Do you feel like that your last position there as the director of that area, did that kind of set you up for your post career in what you're doing now? I know that you work for Victory Strategies. You're the managing director there as a leadership training there. You feel like that last year or so with the academy was really kind of a jumping off point for this new position you're in?
Yeah, I think what it taught me was that I was really passionate about it, right? I think as you get ready to transition to retire, sometimes it's a little, I don't know, it's confusing. Like, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to do with this next chapter? Right. And I knew I was passionate about leadership. I love the opportunity to lead teams and people. But this last job really cemented that for me, that this was something that I was passionate about. I mean, I think we talk about finding our why and our purpose. And I really felt like that cemented mine of like, yep, this is absolutely what I want to keep doing. I'll just do it outside of the military. So it definitely helped move me in the right direction. Yeah,
that's one of my favorite books. I like Simon Sinek's book, The Why. I've read that a couple times too. And I think you mentioned that somewhere along the way. But that seemed like that fit right into your purview there. So recently heard something that they're trying to phase out the A-10 and replace it with an F-35 or something like that. How do you feel about that?
The Air Force has wanted to retire the A-10 for quite some time, just to make room for new, more high-tech aircraft. And to me, the most important thing is that no matter what we do, no matter which direction the Air Force takes, there has to be a focus on close air support. Yeah,
that's why I asked the question. I mean, that's like one of the only planes. That's the one plane that does that well. So I was curious because when I read about it, they said the F-35 is kind of more of a high, again, I'll get it wrong, but a high altitude type of plane. And I thought, well, what are they going to put in the place of the Warthog?
Yeah, it comes down to mission and mindset. I think we send some of our best pilots to fly the F-35 because we want their mindset. We want their sense of support for our ground troops to permeate that community as well. Gotcha. So it really is, it's a mindset. It's having the ability to train for it and be good at it. I mean, that's why A-10 pilots are the best at doing close air support. We train for it. We prepare for it. So, I think that to me is really the important thing, is to not lose sight of that mission.
Yeah, that's great. And then I also read something recently, and this wasn't original to my conversation with you, but that they were going to take duty, honor, and country out of the oath. Had you heard about that?
No, I mean, the Air Force Academy has an honor code. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. But,
it might not, it might not be related directly to the Air Force, but I heard just 2 weeks ago that they're trying to remove that statement from one of the oaths or one of the whatever. And I just didn't know if you'd heard that. I felt like that was kind of like, that's the mantra of all of our men and women in the military is a duty, honor, and country. And then the last question I have for you, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of being a mom, being a wife, being a leader, being a fighter pilot, not always doing all of those things really well, but somewhere in there having some sense of balance of doing them all, even if I didn't do them all really well at certain points. I think the fact that I was able to do those things in my life and continue to do many of them, other than the fighter pilot part, now that I'm retired. But, I'm very proud of being able to do that, to serve my country, but also to be a mom and a wife and to give to others and hopefully now give back.
Yeah, that's amazing. I again, the story is incredible, but the underlying story is so much better to me. I wondered, did you ever pick back up the astronaut desire, or did that go by the wayside?
No, I mean, I would love to do that someday for sure. And it's more realistic now that I still could. I think you hit turning points in your life, you hit turning points in your career. And I kind of hit this pivot point of, do I go for that astronaut track or do I continue what I'm doing? And the reality was that I absolutely loved flying the A-10. I love the mission of supporting our ground troops and wasn't ready to give it up.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great story. Well, what's next for the Colonel Campbells in your life? What's next for you folks? What's next for your husband? What's next for you? I know you're doing the victory strategies. Is he staying connected and doing his own thing, or what's happening there?
Well, we live in Colorado. We do a lot of support and mentoring for our cadets at the Air Force Academy.
Okay, great.
But we're both actively involved in the victory strategies team.
Oh, okay.
Leadership development coaching. And that's where my husband spends the majority of his time is executive coaching and leadership coaching. And I spend most of my time out on the road talking to teams and organizations about leadership.
Telling the story. Yeah. I love it. Well, I want to thank you. You've been really a delight. You're everything I thought you would be. And I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that very much. I wanted to thank you for kind of letting us in on your story and letting us in on some of the other details maybe. And I wish you the very best. I look forward to seeing your next book. I don't know what it'll be about, but I'll certainly buy it. I'm a real estate agent, and we have about 300 people in our office, and our manager is always looking for. So I bought her the book, and I said, listen, you got to buy the book because it's great leadership stuff. So she told me yesterday, because I was going to confiscate it and bring it here so I didn't have my little stickies in there. She goes, no.
I love the stickies.
Well, I've been through it twice, and I've listened to it on Audible in my travels. So I try to get all the details. But yeah, she's reading it, and I can't wait to see what she thinks about it. But it had an impact on me. I think it's going to have an impact on a lot of people. If you're interested in finding out more about Kim, you can go to kim-kc-campbell.com and learn more about her. I'm assuming you can get her book on there, but Amazon has her book. I've ordered it twice, and it comes very quickly. It's a great story. You can back it up with this podcast. You can go to Victory Strategies to see what kind of executive coaching they're doing and corporate coaching they're doing. I'm going to pitch her to Coldwell Banker to see if we can get her to do a keynote with our folks. She'd be a great guest. She said, just as you can tell from this podcast, she's very amiable and she's very kind and humble, obviously. So we're thankful for that. But Kim, thanks for being on this show, and we just wish you the best going forward. And thank you for your service. Tell your husband thank you for your service, and best to your two boys. But thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. See you.
You've been listening to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. Our passion is to talk to the brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes, anyone who's made it, and dive into their struggles, their successes, and their secrets. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Grind to Growth to Greatness. See you next time.